understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How you doing there? It is time for the podcast, and today we're going to be talking about the new Irish emigrant experience, because emigration out of Ireland, people talk a lot about immigration, but emigration is running at record levels, and it is largely Irish young people who are leaving because of the housing market. Now, many years ago, John, there was a book. I don't know if you remember, Johnny Boy. How are you anyway? I didn't see you there.
I'm good, as always. Raring to go, Mac.
Rare to go. I'm listening for tales on and off screen so that we can actually catch up for the week. But you might remember, John, Leaving Cert, a book called Deal on Jury, written by a fella called Donald Pather MacAuliffe.
Nah, it doesn't ring a bell at all with me.
Okay, right. Okay, so Swatty Pants here remembers it. Okay?
Yes, of course you do.
And Deal on Jury was a book that was maybe it's on the Honours Irish. No, can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter, John. Doesn't matter. It was a very, very brilliant book written by this fella called Donald Pather MacAuliffe, who was from Galway.
Yeah.
And he went to England in the 1950s to work as an Irish navvy. So Deal on Jury means the diary of an exile.
Yeah.
And it's an extraordinary book, well worth. If you're interested in this stuff, just Google it. It's still, I'm sure, is available. It's still in print. And it's in print in Irish and in English.
Well, I remember the Peg Stairs book. That was the book I did for the Leaving Cert, which was another story of, well, it was a miserable story, but it was all her kids emigrating as well, all heading off to the Mary Kay and all the rest.
America emigrating and dying.
And dying, yeah. Oh, yeah, there was lots.
They were always dying, falling off cliffs, down the blaskets and doing all sorts of carry on, right?
That's
okay.
Miserable.
But I mean, you know what it's, John, because you remember what it starts with the word, the opening sentence of Peg, John. Tá cos amháin an talamh agus tá cos eile in san relic, which means I have one, think about the melancholy attitude of this lady. I have one foot on the land and one foot in the grave.
How do you remember that shit?
Because my brain is a freaking sponge of mad things. Anyway, the point is, it's just full on, right?
That's right up there with the best of times and the worst of times.
It's brilliant though, isn't it? It's brilliant. Tá cos amháin an talamh agus tá an cos eile in san relic. Anyway, brilliant stuff. So, but Deal on Jury was also a very book, and I read the book, and it really had a kind of a profound impact on me, because then we subsequently went to London, and it was about the generation before us, and they were largely working class lads, country lads and lassies who went over, started at the very, very bottom, definitely suffered racism, lots of anti-Irish feeling, lots of anti-immigrant feeling, all that sort of stuff. And this was all about there was a sensitivity, the networks, the good people he met, the bad people he met, the living conditions of the navvies, the way they had to forge bonds together, all that sort of stuff. And it was the traditional, one would describe, experience of Irish immigrants. Now we have a new tribe of Irish immigrants who are much more likely to be highly educated, much more likely to be highly mobile, much more likely to move around between foreign destinations and immigrant centres, and maybe even much less likely to be plugged into specifically Irish networks, because they're basically citizens of the world.
Yeah.
But all of them still have a residual yearning to come home. And most of them, John, talk about the impact of house prices on their lives, not just on their economy and their economic life, but on their emotional life, their relationships, their spiritual life, all that sort of stuff. And today we're going to talk to one of them, but I want to put it against the background of what we were talking about last week. Remember last week we talked to Patrick Walsh of Dogpatch Labs.
Yes, yeah. That was a great interview. We got loads of response and comments on that. But remind us again of what he was actually saying, what his key points were.
So Patrick was making the point very eloquently and I think very passionately about the notion that Irish innovators, people who do things for themselves, who set up companies on their own, which is the elixir of modern economics, are not being given a fair crack of the whip. There are far too many impediments. It is too difficult to set things up. It is too expensive to set things up. It is too risky to set things up. And ultimately, a lot of young Irish people who would set up businesses here and have a go backing themselves either don't, either they get a well-paid, paying job as an employee, or they leave the country. Now, you will know that the economist in me has always alighted upon or settled on the idea that what makes the economy actually move isn't fiscal policy or government deficits or the rate of inflation or all those things you hear economists talk about, but is the Schumpeterian idea of the relentless gales of creative destruction. And what that is all about is how new companies supersede old companies, how new ideas are better than old ideas, how there is an evolutionary dimension within the economy which propels us forward. And that evolutionary dimension is not too dissimilar from Darwinian ideas. And Darwin didn't say, by the way, the survival of the fittest. He actually said the survival of the most adaptive. So it is the person or the individual or the country or the company that adapts to the world. And in order for a society to become the type of economy that generates the opportunities for people, innovators need to be not only celebrated, but they need to be given space. And an interesting thing, the key ratio is not the number of innovators for the population, the number of entrepreneurs, the absolute number, but it's actually the attitude of the rest of people towards those entrepreneurs, those risk takers, those people who back themselves. If the general attitude of the society is biased towards them, well, they will do their thing. If the general attitude of the society puts up impediments for those people to take risks, well, then they will go off and do it somewhere else. Well, that was the general topic of our discussion with Patrick.
Yeah.
And then on Wednesday, I think it was, I got an email out of the blue from Brisbane in Australia, from a young Irish man called Matthew Ruddy. And Matthew said to me, I have been listening to the podcast for a long time. I've never, ever written an email to anybody like this, but I was so moved or in a way so touched or so triggered, to use a millennial term that is a term that John and I don't use, that I wanted to write to you about my story, about being an Irish innovator, having a go in Ireland, and then finally throwing the towel because it was too difficult. And this is an experience that many, many thousands of young Irish people feel, and many of Matthew's contemporaries. So we are going down to Brisbane. And before we say that, Matthew, I am going on a book tour to Australia. So you said at the end of the email, I'll see you in Australia. I actually will. I'm going on a book tour in October to Australia. We will have to figure it out as to whether we do a gig or not. But that's just marking your card. Matthew, lovely to see you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Great. So tell me about your reaction to the podcast last week, but more importantly, your own story.
Sure. So my story begins in Dublin, where I was born and raised. Throughout my time in school, I always had a secret interest in computers. Didn't quite tell friends, trying to remain cool. But
John had the same problem.
Yeah, Nerdsville.
Exactly. But secretly, I was actually eyeing up my first car. I really wanted to purchase my first car around the age of 17, having done my driving test and whatnot. And I thought, this is a great idea. I can use my skills to try and make a bit of money to pay for my first car. At the time, my auntie was a photographer and she needed a website done. And she had built her first website on a platform called WordPress. So she brought me in. She paid me, I think, the sum total of 150 euros to build a website for her. And one of the big issues we had was that she couldn't get her photography on the website to show in like a slideshow format. So I took it upon myself to write code that would build out software that could do that for her in WordPress, and decided that it was worth open sourcing it to see if anyone had any interest in using it as well. Thankfully, they did. I made a bit of money, and I think from there onwards, managed to buy my first car. But not only that, managed to make enough money to live. I very much contemplated not finishing the Leaving Cert at the time, much to my parents' detriment. They really didn't appreciate that conversation.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I did though, and thankfully I did, because I think, those backup options are incredibly important. I went through with that. I got a place in Trinity for computer science, but decided to defer it for the year to see if I could do anything in this space or with what I had already achieved, which in hindsight was very small, but to somebody of that age was immense. I outreached to a friend of mine, a guy called James Welton, who was...
Oh, I remember him. I know him.
Yeah. He started a thing called Coder Dojo, which was coding clubs for kids. There wasn't anything like that when I was in school, but had there been, it might have been great. And he was in Dogpatch Labs, the original Dogpatch Labs, which was run by a venture capital firm based in Dublin in the old Mason Hayes building. So he said, why don't you sit beside me? Let's do some work. Let's see what we can do. So I was petrified, but went in for, I think, maybe 2-3 years, worked alongside him and other companies in that space just as a young consultant. I'm sure they were all delighted to get really cheap labor out of me, and it was great for me because I was getting.
That's what John gets out of me too. Don't worry about it. It never ends.
Yeah, I don't think you can get that kind of experience any other way. So it was great to get it, and it was fueling my appetite. Right, I thought at some point in time I was going to be in a position to do something myself. I think later as the years went on, my sentiments changed a bit, but at the time I was very excited to be young and ready to give it a go. So yeah, I did that for a bit until Dogpatch Labs in that form shifted into Dogpatch Labs in the IFSC run by Paddy. Hence why I was delighted to hear he was on the call. I thought that was really cool, and hence why I reached out.
That's Paddy, by the way. I call him Patrick because I don't know him well enough. That's Paddy Walsh, who's known as Paddy by his mates, who basically set up this discussion in the sense that actually seeded the idea for Matthew to get in contact with us. Now, tell us, Matthew, so what happens then? Because then, so you're flying along. You said you were working Coder Dojo. You also said in the email the guys from Intercom, I presume the likes of Des Trainer, those guys were probably sitting around close to you, and things were buzzing. So this is, what are we talking about? 2012, 2013, those years?
Yeah, around that time, I think maybe until it must have been 2014, I think around then, I could be wrong, when it changed hands. So I didn't get a lot of it, but I got a few years and enough to inspire a young 18, 19-year-old at the time. So that was great.
So tell me what happened after that, because what we want to get onto is the theme of your email to me was the cost of housing in particular, and the detrimental effect of the explosion in rents and house prices on your generation and on your generation's appetite for risk.
Yeah. So given I'd made a bit of money, I mean, again, not a lot in real terms, but enough for me to support myself. So my parents were off the hook. They didn't have to support me in any of this endeavor, which made it a lot easier to have that conversation with them, given I had already, I think at that point, I had deferred uni for 2 years.
If you don't mind me saying, it's very Silicon Valley to defer uni or to drop out of uni. I mean, this is a path that has been trod by many people before you.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's for everybody, but it was for me. I think I learned better on the job, which was just a trait of my own. I also think that the sphere that we're in, it's one that you can learn as you go. I think technology moves so fast, so it could be incredibly difficult to keep up anyway. But to go back to where I was living in Sandyford at the time, supporting myself, renting an apartment there. And I continued to do so throughout. When Dogpatch moved to the IFSC, I was still living there at the time, but it was coinciding with a difficult time. I think at the very beginning, my rent was, I guess you could consider reasonable or very reasonable by today's standards, at about 1,200 euros a month for a 2-bed. And I think within 4 or 5 years finishing up, it was closer to $2,000 and beyond. It immediately pushed me out, which was a really difficult situation to navigate at the time. But I think the thing that I struggled with was how it affected my decision-making, my risk-taking. It affected how my risk of aversion began to kick in. I started thinking, this is not really a good idea. What am I doing? What am I sacrificing? At that point in time, I was using a lot of the money I was making to live. And I think that that started to really creep into to me. I think some people continue to take risks, to have a tolerance to their, not much tolerance to that. But that,
Yep.
not me. I think my logic started to kick in, and it really began to affect what I was doing and the risks that I was taking.
And so you said to me also in the email, a lot of people you knew, or a lot of people said, look, hold on a second. It's far safer to me, given how much rent I'm paying and given that the years are clicking by, to get a well-paid job if I possibly can, or a job if I possibly can, and forget this idea of innovating and going out on your own and being an entrepreneur and a business starter, and actually just basically say, look, I'll just take the gig elsewhere and I'll become an employee.
Exactly. I mean, at the time, I thought, okay, I committed to the $2,000 rental increase. I just worked harder. I made more of an effort to take on consultancy work and less time maybe developing my own skills or trying to pursue what I originally wanted to do, which was do something on my own. I felt at that point I was probably gaining enough confidence to give something a try. And I think I knew enough people in the space to at least have some emotional backing, if not financial. But it got tough. And I think I can't recall exactly at what point in that year that things really started to fall undone. But I think I took a bit of a go with some projects at the time. Things weren't really going very well very quickly, and I'd taken an income hit as a result. So I started to freak out. And, at that point, it was probably game over for my extreme risk taking in that regard. The following year, I moved out of the apartment, tried to find another one, really struggled to find anything. It was incredibly difficult. And fortunately for me, had a family situation that could bring me in. I could live at home again, but I don't think everybody has that opportunity. And I think at that point in time, though, my risk taking had changed. I was probably approaching 24, 25 at that point, and things start to shift. You start to wonder, is this really worth it? What am I doing? I don't want to start Facebook, but I'd like to do something a little bit different. So what am I doing here? Is this really worth it anymore?
It's interesting when you put a timeline that you're 24, we're talking about what, 2016, 17, around then. This is also coincident with the beginning of an increase, an acceleration, an emigration of your generation out of the country. And when you look across, I mean, John and I are always amazed and really, really gratified when we look at the spread of listeners.
Yeah.
And the spread of listeners of podcasts, your Dubais, your Londons, your New Yorks, Torontos, Melbourne, yourself in Brisbane. This is a generation of Irish people who have left. So you're seeing a whole host of people, of your mates and friends of friends, etc., in similar situations.
Exactly. I feel like I kind of felt it before them. I skipped a couple of years by not going to uni. I think that, when friends were finishing university, a lot of them in finance, they felt it the years preceding that. So they might have been at home, for example, thinking, what am I going to do next? They might have had graduate jobs at the time. So not particularly highly paid, but on a trajectory that they could see clearly. But the one impediment was always, and for me too, and for everybody, was always where are you going to live? I think once you start to get beyond 24, 25, 26, 27 through 30, living with mom and dad is not so easy. You start to think, okay, what am I going to do? And you have to leave really in Ireland because most people are not earning anywhere near enough money at the time. I figured that out, I think, a bit earlier than everybody else. But it took a couple of years for me to really get the courage to go. I think there was a lot of, and a pandemic, I think, kind of delayed that a little bit. I was ready to go to London actually at the time. I felt that maybe it had a better opportunity with work and also with living, the opportunity to actually find somewhere to live. Despite the fact that being incredibly difficult to find somewhere to live in London, the more appealing prospect. I didn't get to do that before the pandemic, but I did afterwards, which was great. But very quickly, I think it didn't suit my partner more than me at the time, and it was difficult being there. So we made the ultimate decision to come to Australia, which was not one really based in tech, but more so based in feelings and living conditions and things like that.
So what you're saying is there's a whole generation now, maybe two, but certainly one generation that would like, if it were possible, to live in Ireland. But the major factor is rents and house prices. The major factor.
Absolutely. I mean, it is in my opinion, factor. I think I love home. I think home's a great place. I love spending lots of time there, but there is nowhere to live. And even if you find somewhere to live, God help you. I mean, it's probably rough. If you're lucky, you might find a nice place. But the cost is astronomical too. I mean, I'm approaching now, like I'm 31, so I'm thinking, okay, like let's get married, let's start a family. I'm thinking about all these things. I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to set down these roots? There's no hope. And granted, you don't necessarily have to live in a city like Dublin. I get that, but if you're in our space where I am, that's where the excitement is. Our cities are where the excitement is. So it's very difficult to not want to be there, and also just having been from Dublin, to want to be where you're from. It's a non-proposition. There is no proposition. I don't know how anybody can really manage it.
And Matthew, when you're chatting to mates, in Brisbane or, down in Australia, is this the perennial topic of conversation when you're talking about Ireland and coming home, or not coming home, as the case may be?
Yes, I think that in most circumstances, I think for a lot of people, look, it is true that there is opportunity abroad with work in different, I can't speak for other job types, but it is true. But a lot of people do wish to return home and they won't. It's not something I necessarily felt too much in London, but definitely in Australia, having mixed with expats quite a bit, both Irish, English, Welsh, everything, in terms of
there is a Lions tour going on at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe that's why I said that. But they're not going to reside themselves to the conditions. I mean, Australia is not a cheap place, by God, no way. But it is possible at the very least to have livable living conditions for a lot of play. But it's manageable, right? I felt like at home, I would be going back to live with my parents if I was lucky, unless I made a substantial amount of cash to go in and suddenly I can afford a house, but I just don't see it. And even then, what am I getting myself into, right? I'm thinking, me being someone who wants to take risk, who wants to not have stability and security in what I do every day, immediately that financial burden is going to get straight into my thought process. Suddenly your risk aversion kicks in again.
Matthew, just to put some numbers around this, what's the equivalent in terms of rental prices and cost of living in Australia, in Brisbane, where you are?
Yeah, that's a very tricky question to answer because the situation here is rapidly changed. Aside from the fact that Australia is made up from multiple cities, Sydney being extortionately expensive for a tremendous amount of time, Brisbane is unique in that I think nobody really discovered it until the pandemic. So the cost of living in Brisbane went from being very reasonable to suddenly not very reasonable. And I'm talking like 50% house price increase in 3 years. So it's pretty intense. I mean, our rent has gone up about, I think, 15% in the 2 years that we've been here. And I would expect it to go up again. I don't think they have the same level of rent control as those other countries. So you're pretty much just take it or leave it. It's quite competitive to find a place. But what I will say is that places exist and finding somewhere is possible. And we do pay, I think, the equivalent of about 1,800 euros a month now. And okay. It is a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom apartment with a parking space. And it's relatively big for what it is. I mean, it far eclipses what I ever had in Sandyford. And I think that alone does an awful lot for one's mentality, right? Suddenly, I feel a little bit more revitalized with work because suddenly I feel very secure in where I am. And I think that plays into my decision making. I feel like I'm probably on the verge of taking a risk with a career in due course. I've been doing a lot of consulting over the past couple of years, but I think now I might actually take a step back and do something different. And I haven't felt like that for a long time. And I personally put a lot of that down to just feeling security of tenure in the first place. Other than that, I think living costs are probably on par. I mean, food's the same. Everything else really is the same. There's a great incentive here. The public transport's only 50 cents, which I think is fabulous. They brought that in as a cost of living relief. Now they can't get rid of it because it would be political suicide. But
50 cents to go anywhere you want on a bus or train, is it?
Yeah. Or there's a boat on the river, which is fabulous. You can get a boat every day to work, which is a really nice, unique piece. But yeah, it's great. So it's an easy place to live, which has been very nice. But I do say, like, I think a lot of people are trying to find somewhere to live. They're trying to find somewhere to be, somewhere to raise a family, somewhere to have space, somewhere to thrive as opposed to survive. And they struggled at home and said, no, I don't want it. I just don't want to do that.
Well, it's interesting listening to you because I mean, the macro data. So we're talking about micro testimony stories. So the macro data substantiates exactly what you're saying, which is small businesses in Ireland, small companies in Ireland, startups, people trying to do their own thing and actually create what I said at the very top of the show, the elixir of economic dynamism. They are not gradually, but rapidly disappearing from the landscape. And what they are being replaced by, or what they're doing, is they're taking a job in big multinational tech because it's safer and it can generate X amount of money per month. That means that the knock-on effect for the small startups is they can't pay the wages of the talented people who are going to the big tech companies. And so there's a brain drain away from what would naturally be the gene pool of startups in Ireland, and it's going to the tech companies. And of course, the tech companies are foreign owned and it's an employment idea. And I suppose after a while in employment, you become risk averse yourself. You get used to not taking risks. You get used to being part of a greater firm, some security there, etc. And this all has a negative feedback effect on the society because it's taking away the very dynamism that you need. I mean, is that what you're seeing when you talk to your friends? Is there a resentment? Is there an anger? Or is there just a sort of resignation that this is the way Ireland is run?
That's a good question. Depends who you ask. It probably depends on the career. I think in some circumstances, not all. Look, there is always Irish people, we're curious, we like to emigrate. I think some people were always going to go. But some people feel forced or pushed. And me to an extent, I think probably more on the angry side at times. I think sometimes it's frustrating when you feel, I've been in situations where opportunity has arisen and that floor income level that one would need to just live a comfortable life is way too high for me to even get involved in that situation, to get involved in that opportunity. I think startup culture is notoriously difficult. I think that it's really, you're generally offered equity as opposed to an income. If you're lucky, you might get a little bit of both, but unfortunately, I can't pay my rent with that. So that's quite a frustrating situation to be in at times. And I think when you're getting on that plane, you can be full of resentment. I think I definitely a little bit was. It's excitement too, of course. It's something different, but there was a part of me that felt like I don't ever consider myself like a failure. I think I've actually done very well for myself, and I'm very happy with everything that I've ever achieved, everything I've ever done will work. But there's a part of me that's left a lot behind, right? That's left connections behind. It's left work opportunities behind. And I don't doubt that new ones will present themselves, but it's just frustrating that it requires living across the world, and that's not even getting into being away from family, being away from friends, being away from everybody, trying to essentially meet new people and make those new connections again.
Matthew, this is, I think, a story that thousands of podcast listeners will identify with, be they immigrants themselves, be they parents of immigrants, be they mates of immigrants, cousins, boyfriends, girlfriends, lovers, whatever you have in yourself. I mean, I think this is a story that is going to be told. I think what is pathetic is the way in which over generations, I think certain Irish power structures, governments, etc., have kind of used immigration as a safety valve. It's like, if they go, well, then they can't be that angry and they can't be that fed up. And basically we can have and hang on to what we hold. And I think there's a generational side to this. I think there's a class side to it. There's all sorts of things going on. But I think it's a story that will resonate with many, many people and has echoes of all sorts of institutional failure at home. And the price is being paid by people who leave rather than by the people who stay. And when I hear someone like you in Australia, it's Ireland's loss and it's Australia's gain. That's very, very clear to me. And as I said, by the way, I will be coming down at a certain stage. But thank you so much, Matthew.
Thank you very much.
That was a brilliant interview with Matthew. And as you said before, that it's great getting the first-hand stories from people, the testimony, as you say. But it's interesting, I think I was telling you that I was at a wedding, my nephew's wedding, Tom and Sinead. Congratulations. But I was at their wedding last week and they had a whole load of mates over. Some had come from Australia, some had come from the UK, some were still here. But they were echoing pretty much everything that Matthew was saying. All of their frustrations, all of their resentment, all of their anger was all coming through. And some of them have had the opportunity to leave. Some of them can't leave for various reasons. And some are making plans. And as you said, you know, wherever they go, it's their gain and our loss.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, look, there's probably there's a reason why Australia in particular hasn't had a recession since the 90s, which is amazing. Australia sailed through the global financial crisis.
Yeah.
And it is because, or maybe a factor is, that they are receiving in lots of well-educated young migrants who are bringing their energy, their dynamism, their ideas, their capital, their networks to Australia, and they're thriving there. I mean, it stands to reason that that's a factor.
Yeah.
I'll give you just one other interesting thing before we go, John. There's a fascinating article this morning by John Byrne-Murdoch, friend of the show from the FT, data expert. And the article is about it. Why are young adults in the English-speaking world so unhappy? That's the title. Amazing article. It looks at the World Happiness Report. It's a Gallup poll.
Yeah.
And it basically talks to people of different age groups and asks them, you know, how are you feeling about the world, your mental well-being? Are you experiencing worry, sadness, anger, anxiety, all those sort of things? And what you see is there has been a dramatic increase in the number of young people in Canada, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, and the US. A dramatic increase in anxiety, in mental health problems, et cetera, in their 20s and 30s, vis-a-vis other countries such as France, Belgium, Germany, Western Europe, Netherlands in particular. And what John Byrne-Murdoch is saying is exactly what we've just said there, is that there is a direct link between people feeling happy about themselves, having what we always call, John, a stake in society, and house prices and rents. And what you will find is, John, think about this, since the mid-90s, home ownership in Ireland has fallen by 48% for the people between 25 and 34. That is the highest in the world.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what Matthew's talking about. It's exactly what John Byrne-Murdoch is picking up on the data about anxiety and depression, etc. And of course, housing is at the root, or is one of the roots of this. Not the only root, but one of the root problems. And I think we should probably leave it there, and we will come back to this issue because it is an absolute abdication of responsibility on the part of the governing classes and the governing institutions to allow this to happen.
Absolutely.